I found Berserk when I was 12. My favorite YouTuber at the time had mentioned that it was his favorite manga, so I decided to give it a go. Now, there is plenty of nightmare-fueled moments in Berserk that no 12-year-old should ever be exposed to, but this character was especially concerning. Of course, I'm talking about Wyald. After 7 read-throughs, I was desensitized enough to start looking deeper into his character, and I came to this question. Why does Wyald have no backstory, and why does no one care to find out? Now, Wyald was one of the most diabolical villains in the series, so much so that his entire existence is repeatedly cut out of every anime adaptation made to date. But his lack of backstory inspired some interesting questions. I know it's pretty late for this, but warning, this video contains some of the most horrific spoilers to date. If you are reading Berserk and don't know what the eclipse is, then click off this video. And if you don't know anything about Wyald, this is going to be heavy. So if you'd rather not deal with any of the graphic images listed on the screen, feel free to click off. I completely understand. Okay, so what's our setting? After Griffith is rescued by the Hawk Captains, the king commands the Black Dog Knights to retrieve the cripple. He's still super tight that Griffith matched his daughter and the years haven't been kind. Upon hearing the order, His Majesty's royal consorts express their grievances. They see Wyald and his Black Dog Knights as nothing more than savages, notorious for their wartime degeneracy. The king admits to fearing Wyald, acknowledging the monster within him, and actively choosing to send him to distant battlefields to keep him at arm's length. Yet the king still uses his services because he acknowledges their martial strength as being on par with Prime Band of the Hawk. Storytime. Back in the day, the king decided to make a group of knights comprised of criminals. They were to fight for the captaincy. 2 people stepped up. This guy was one, and Wyald was the other. Wyald posterized him without ever taking off his shackles, or using a weapon, solidifying his place as the leader. He was a serious problem. Though it wasn't merely his physical strength that made Wyald terrifying, it was his philosophy. One of Wyald's men calls for him during an orgy. Wyald barks at the man for interrupting his fun, but quickly changes his tune after hearing the tea. He strangles his partner to death mid-stroke. In this panel, Moira captures Wyald's monstrous nature so well it's terrifying, right on the boundary between man and monster. Wyald's men are terrified of him, and are often forced to participate in his deadly games, though they seem only to be frightened when their lives are at stake, often willfully immersing themselves in the culture of rape, murder, and infanticide that Wyald has cultivated. Now, Wyald is one of the few villains without a backstory, yet he feels so complete. Why? No one ended this arc thinking, wow, I don't understand the guy. I wonder why he was like that. What happened in his childhood? No. Wyald's lack of backstory doesn't take away from his character because his villainous archetype is universal. Everyone has encountered a person that pursues pleasure for the sake of pleasure, hooked on the feeling that they receive in the present. Wyald is the logical conclusion of what happens to a man that trades his soul for enough power to pursue pleasure and never be checked. You become a beast. You become Wyald. A slave to pleasure, putting excitement at the top of his pyramid of needs. This archetype of villain is evil in a very interesting way, and Moira pulls no punches when displaying the lifestyle and chaos surrounding such a monster. Wyald has no grand ambition. He does not desire power, nor wealth, nor fame, though he uses them as vehicles to take him where he needs to go. He only desires that which leads him to orgasm. Like an addict looking for their fix, Wyald searches for pleasure in every way that he can. Just like any junkie, at the beginning your sensitivity to pleasure is very high, so something like an ice cream can be enough to satisfy you. But what happens when you finish your ice cream? Well, you want more pleasure. And if you eat another ice cream, it's going to be less pleasurable than the first one because of the law of diminishing returns. Your baseline inches up, and eventually your standards for pleasure scales up over time, as you experience more novel, more stimulating ecstasies. This inevitably tempts the addict towards the taboo, which is often a gateway to evil. Let's break it down, from a male pleasure-seeking perspective. I want an ice cream, I want a hug, I want a kiss, I want to sleep with somebody, a threesome, BDSM, all of the above, but now under the influence of drugs. If you keep scaling this up and never draw a line, you get the things that Wyald does. And if you think I'm going too far, you haven't thought about it enough. Every step in that list was more stimulating than the last, and if unchecked, pursuits of pleasure for the sake of pleasure will lead directly to evil. Excitement as a goal has no destination. Eventually, you get to a point where morally excusable pleasure seeking becomes dull, leaving only the hunger for excitement that remains, and your feet scraping into the territory of evil. And when you are a monster, there are few people with the courage or means to check your behavior. Well, except this guy. Wyald never needed a backstory because his story is one of the most common on Earth. No added story can make him more relatable. When he was defeated, he reverted back to his true form, a little old man. Who did he sacrifice? Likely the last person that cared for him and wanted him to stop his debauchery and be a good man. Like and subscribe for more content. Peace.